Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, there are many issues that could be discussed during this debate: the housing crisis in Auckland, the government's willingness to put $130 million into a profit-making casino but not into providing a decent public transport system. But today I want to focus on foreign affairs, and I want to do so because tomorrow the Iraqi Foreign Minister, Dr Ibrahim al-Jafari, visits New Zealand. Mr Speaker, there's no doubt this is a carefully stage-managed event. Mr al-Jafari is coming here because he's been asked to come here to formally request assistance by way of boots on the ground by New Zealand troops in Iraq. And it will be so carefully stage-managed that I can tell you now what the response of the Prime Minister will be, that we have listened to his request and we will consider it carefully. Mr Speaker, it will come as a surprise to no New Zealander that this is simply designed to soften up public opinion for the deployment of New Zealand soldiers to Iraq, which most New Zealanders over a period of time will come strongly to oppose. You see, it really is a charade, because we know the decision has already been taken by the key government to deploy New Zealand soldiers in Iraq. We know that, notwithstanding the promise made by Mr Key before the election that there would be no New Zealand ground troops in Iraq. A promise made and not reversed until safely after the election. And how do we know that they have already made the decision? We know it, Mr Speaker, because John Key told Tony Abbott. He told them that we would have 40 to 100 New Zealand troops committed to Iraq. At the same time, he was telling New Zealanders that no decision was made. That is dishonest. He told the Australians. He told the Americans. Jerry Brownlee went and said it to the then Secretary of Defence, and he told the British, but he did not tell New Zealanders. He is treating New Zealanders with contempt. You know, I watched yesterday during question time when he had a hard question to answer about difference of opinions between Mr Joyce and Mr English, and he said, well, he'd listened to both the children. And you know, that was very patronising, and you could see the looks on the faces of his senior colleagues, but that's exactly what he's treating New Zealanders like, children. They're not adult enough to know. We will tell them when they need to know, when we actually have no time for debate and the decision is already taken. But in the United Kingdom, of course, John Key went further, and he was on a BBC interview, actually being done by one of my former students, Lucy Hockings. And he was very upfront in a way that he is not in New Zealand. He said, yes, we'll be sending troops there, notwithstanding the human costs, because that is the price of the club. For the first time, we got the real reason why we'll be deploying New Zealand troops to Iraq and putting them in harm's way. Not for human rights reasons, not even for ISIS, because that is the price of being in the club. That was the same club, Mr Speaker, that John Key and Bill English wanted us to join in 2003 when the United States launched the invasion of Iraq. I remember it well. I was Foreign Minister, having Bill English ask me questions why we were not supporting the invasion, why we were not part of it, why we weren't working with our friends and allies, and John Key said exactly the same. And I wonder if they now think back with shame about their comments, because history has proven that that invasion was not simply a disaster that cost tens of thousands of human lives, but that was a disaster based on a lie. And Colin Powell said to me, when I was Foreign Minister, he said the worst thing I ever did was to go to the Security Council and say that we invaded because of weapons of mass destruction, and I believe him. He was a decent and honourable man. But that disaster spawned the existence and support for ISIS today. Without the 2003 invasion, there would be no basis for ISIS to exist in Iraq. That was the price of a decision made without thinking through the consequences, gung-ho, maybe for all the right intentions, I don't know, but the wrong decision. And every Western intervention in that region has ended up achieving the opposite to what the objective was, whether it was Iraq or whether it was Libya. Libya in absolute chaos at the moment. Yes, easy to get rid of, easy to hate Gaddafi and Saddam, evil, bad people. But what are the consequences of your actions? And the West has never learned how to achieve good results other than by going in with guns blazing and ending up achieving exactly the opposite after enormous loss of human and mainly civilian lives. Mr. Speaker, John Key and Bill English were wrong in 2003 and they are wrong now. They are doing the wrong thing for the wrong reason. You know, New Zealanders do understand sacrifice. They understand that there are times when we have to put ourselves on the line, and there are sometimes costs that we have to pay for the preservation of our society and our democracy. But what they demand, quite rightfully, is to know that we are doing the right thing for the right reason, and that we have thought it through, and that there are achievable objectives that will flow from the sacrifice that might be made. And we are not doing this for the right reason. Jerry Brownlee was absolutely right in condemning his own Prime Minister's statement about being part of the club as unfortunate. Very courageous, Minister, very courageous. Backtracked very quickly, and maybe that wasn't a show of courage. But the fact of the matter is, it is not the right thing to do, it is not for the right reason, and sadly it will not achieve the objectives that we are looking for. Mr. Speaker, I heard the Prime Minister sounding quite passionate about human rights in the House this week. First time ever I have heard him speak in that manner. But I wonder where the Prime Minister was when it came to condemning the actions of Bashar al-Assad, who has slaughtered more than 100,000 of his own people and again created the foundation for the existence, the creation of ISIS in Syria. I wonder where the national government is on Boko Haram and condemnation of that. When I hear the Prime Minister talking about beheadings, I wonder why he said not a word about the routine stonings and beheadings under Sharia law by Saudi Arabia. We condemn rightly ISIS for beheadings, and we run the flag at half-mast for the King of Saudi Arabia, who presides over a regime that kills in a brutal way hundreds of people for reasons, for causes that would not even be against the law in our country. Mr. Speaker, there are some questions that should be put to Dr. Al-Jafari, and they are these, and I hope the Minister of Defence and the Prime Minister ask these questions. Why should we have confidence in putting New Zealanders at risk to go to Iraq when the Iraqi army has performed so poorly? Why should we believe that we can make a difference when the United States has invested $25 billion and thousands of American trainers to produce an army that remains corrupt, incompetent and poorly led? Why is it that when the first time they went up against ISIS, the Iraqi army collapsed and passed their advanced American weapons to ISIS? Why is it that the Peshmerga have defeated ISIS in Kobani with a fraction of the support that the Iraqi army has been given? Why is it that American money is being spent to fund 50,000 soldiers in Iraq that don't exist? The money put into the pockets of the elite in Iraq. Why is it that they expect us to do for the Iraqi army what the Iraqi army can't and won't do for itself? Mr. Speaker, those are the questions that John Key, Murray McCulley and Jerry Brownlee ought to be asking Dr. Al-Jafari tomorrow, and if there are not good answers to those questions, we should not be putting New Zealand lives at risk for a futile purpose. Let's help with humanitarian aid. The $30 million we'll be spending on troops can do a lot for the 13 million refugees, not only from ISIS, but also from al-Assad and the Shia and Sunni militias.
Order.